Okay, well, I think we're live here. Well, welcome to another episode of Data Ops Live Unfiltered. I'm your host, Frank Bell, Snowflake Data Superhero at ITS Snowflake Solutions. I'm joined here today with our guest, Guy Adams from Data Ops and Thomas Steinborn from Data Ops. We'll introduce them shortly. I just wanted to cover what this session is going to be about and share that. So, again, we're going to cover this topic today, and we're going to really talk a lot about environments and try to really have you understand and go into some pretty deep technical discussions also about like how the both testing environments, development environments, production environments, how to manage them best, and then how they really enable you to be a better data professional. And just a couple short things to cover. We have a Q&A box in the Zoom. If you have questions, send them in there. We'll try to answer them. If we don't answer them on the webinar, we'll answer them afterwards. And then if you have a colleague or friend you're really interested in Snowflake native apps, next session in 2 weeks from now, 8:30 a.m. Pacific, we have another session called Best Practices for Building Snowflake Native Apps. And we're going to go more deeply into what I've done and my team's done over the last 2 years to identify what's the best practices, we've made it so much easier and faster, and especially recently using the DataOps.live platform to build native applications. Okay, so I try to ask this on at least some of these episodes because I still think it's confusing a lot of people. DevOps, DataOps, why should you even care? So just briefly, why I care and why I really came over to focus on this is we're realizing that we needed more tools, we needed more automation, we need more AI to build data applications. And that's what DataOps and especially DataOps.live is about, is building faster data applications. You can call them native apps, you can call them data products, but with less risk and with higher quality, because you need a tool set to do this. You know, I used to build a lot of this infrastructure on my own, but these days you have to use tools to do it. Custom coding it, do it yourself, only will get you so far, especially as you need to scale. And then if you don't want to listen to me about it, this is just a brief thing about Gartner. And they're really coming out with some new studies about how data ops is really changing the game. So if you want to be competitive, you really got to do it. So on that, I'm just going to give you this slide, and then I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about the environment management. But the reason why you need data ops and this part, environment management, is just the complexity that has happened and changed over time, especially over the last 5-6 years with Snowflake, which we're focused on. So right now, you have all these different additions. You know, first we used to have data and shared data, but now we have native apps, container services, Cortex, Streamlit, Snowpark, ML. We're not even talking about another 30, 50 features. So with all these things, if you're going to build real mature data organization and data products, today we're going to focus on automated testing and testing environments and environments in general. But you need this whole like holistic tool set that helps you create dev environments and test environments, and not just create. We were talking about this a little bit before. It's just creating an environment is one thing. It's like being able to update that environment, being able to iterate through problems in that environment, having isolation in that environment is what really matters and makes a differentiation for it. So with that, introducing the topic, I'm going to go over to Thomas to talk more about his experience with automated testing, testing environments, and environments in general, and what he's seen with customers. And you can introduce yourself as well, Thomas.
Sure thing. Thanks, Frank. So for everybody else, my name is Thomas Steinborn. I'm heading the product part at DataOps.live. I've been in the data space for more than 10 years and working with Snowflake for, well, at least the last 5, but actually stopped counting at this point of time. What actually made me bring and come to DataOps is actually what is also core on the screen. It's a problem that I found not really being solved, even though I have been more than 10 years in the data space, which was how do you bring pretty much core DevOps principles to data and make sure you manage code and data in lockstep? And the problem just got bigger and in a way worse when I looked at this and just saw development teams really just coming up with their own solutions, making sure they at least have dev and production there, but they couldn't really do it at scale, and they couldn't really sort of establish the trust with the business stakeholders they were building it for. If I want to unpack that a little bit, one of the key things that come to light and that we help solve here at DataOps is a very fundamental problem that, if you start with that, a single data engineer typically has, which is how do I create for myself a safe environment to actually go and work and do pretty much the work that I need to do, assigned to me in a Jira, a task as a team member, and get that. In the context of Snowflake, there are clearly things that are beneficial to use, like zero-copy clone, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But the related pieces are, how do I actually make sure my code, which in the most simplest case is SQL, is managed in lockstep with that particular environment and this particular feature that I'm currently working on. And you also mentioned flying tests, right? Of course, as I'm going to go and do development of a single change, then I want to also make sure I'm adding and I'm putting tests in that I want to bring there. And we have multiple customers today that actually go and where we solve that problem really also at scale, because it is ultimately not about a single developer. It is very much a problem of working at scale as a team, so that I have 10 developers together that can work as a team, solving each an individual problem. But then first and foremost, when they want to make a release, let's say a weekly release, right? Ideally, not wait a month, 2 months, 3 months, but want to make a weekly release, how do we bring them together and make sure that all the changes that got done by the 10 different engineers can be poured at least to the test environment before we bring it to production, right? Very common problem. And before really doing data operations, and now with DataOps.live, this also as a product, that always was quite a huge problem, because it was a lot of manual tasks, manual operations, a lot of manual approval that had to go in, and testing and testing. And manual, as you know, just leads to more human errors. We're all humans, right? So this is not a blame. This is just a fact. So I love and I'm excited that we can automate that for you and just bring it in. And you mentioned customers. One of our early customers clearly has been Roche. And what excites me most about them is we really scaled out that concept to, well, right now, more than 40 different teams. And they're building more than 500 different projects, all following the same mindset and bringing it in.
And just to put that into context, Thomas, I mean, if you look across some of our biggest customers, the number of, you're talking about projects in the hundreds, but if you look over a month, each of those projects may have 10, 15, 20 changes. So across our biggest customers, we're talking about people who have created literally 10,000 environments potentially in a month. And that means created it as soon as it was needed. That means if it's been alive for more than a certain amount of time, updating it to make sure it accurately reflects the current production environment. And of course, that's potentially 10 or 20,000 environments that had to be deleted cleanly and efficiently and automatically when they weren't needed anymore. So to Frank's point about at the beginning, this is just not something you can hand code at anything like the sort of scale that you need to do to be really effective this. And my background, having come from the software engineering world, is the software engineers have enjoyed this for best part of 20 years. The concept of a software engineer just cutting a branch and being able to deploy to their own Kubernetes cluster, or even run the software on their own laptop. But the ability to have their own dynamic environments has existed for so long in the software world. And when I came to the data world and ran effectively a data engineering team, I had a lot of research, and it was the single biggest thing that was holding data engineers back. It was the single biggest efficiency hit for data engineers, was the fact that they either couldn't get these, or if they got them, it would take them, you know, hours or days to spin up. You know, once we solved that problem, the efficiency of those data engineers went up 50% overnight, just based on that environment management, that automatic environment creation and life cycling.
Yeah, I mean, that's really hitting up on the main topic of this session is, what we had as regular, let's just say developers, software engineers is, since, I don't know, the web really started, we had this feedback loop that was in milliseconds or seconds. When you refresh, you do code, you change, um, and we could never, as data engineers, really create like an isolated environment like that for so long. So that really, I think what people and the audience needs to understand is, if you're a lot of Snowflake customers are still operating in the old way of doing things where they don't have these isolated test environments. So by doing that, it's not just a technical advantage, it's a huge business advantage, because when you have that isolated, complex data set to be able to test it, iterate through it, automatically find errors, and then be able to recreate it, fix the error, recreate it fast, that gives you, that's what these couple slides are about. The efficiency that gives you, it's a game changer. Like if you're not moving towards that, you're going to get crushed by the competitors using Snowflake with these automated tools.
I think it is worth mentioning, or at least addressing the question, when we talk about development environments or environment management, we generally talk about two sorts of environments. There are long-lived environments. These are the ones that are going to be there, obviously, our main or our production environment. We've probably got a long-lived QA environment or an SIT or a pre-prod, or maybe multiple of those. We might have typically a long-lived integration environment where stuff, multiple development streams come together. We might call it integration or dev. And then we've got these long-lived environments, and then there's typically a static number of those, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we've got this potentially cloud of these ephemeral environments, which might exist for an hour, a day, a week, depending on how big the feature is. And one of the questions that I talk to customers a lot about is, well, how many of these things should we have? And one of the common and it's completely understandable. One of the common routes we went as well. I've got 50 engineers, therefore I should have 50 environments. Everyone gets their own environment. And if each person was only ever working on one feature at a time, then that might work. But in reality, the approach that we advocate, and very, very strongly, is it's one environment per feature. And a feature can be as simple as fixing a typo. If I go and fix a typo, I will cut a feature branch, I will get a dynamic environment, I will do my work on it. That environment may not last more than half an hour. But the criticality of having one per feature means that I'm making that change in isolation, I'm testing it in isolation, I'm promoting it in isolation, someone is reviewing my change in isolation, I'm deploying it in isolation, and potentially, if it goes wrong, I'm rolling it back in isolation. Certainly, I remember back in the software world, and it's something even the software world hadn't nailed very well for a long time, was that the number of changes or number of issues you get was that I merged my change and my change is good, but I accidentally merged a few other lines of configuration or a few other files from some other feature I was working on in the same branch, and now all of a sudden you've got problems. So that keeping it really atomic and saying every trouble ticket, every change request has a branch, has an ephemeral environment. It could last an hour, it could last a week, it could last a month, and then it goes away. Having a one-for-one relationship through there has an incredible amount of business value, and it has, to all intents and purposes, no cost associated with it. Once you've got this fully automated, whether you create 10 a day or 1,000 a day, who cares? It's essentially free.
Yeah, you hit on a really good point. I mean, I don't know how many times, when running a development shop for 20 plus years, people have the code right, and they, like you said, they put in one extra line, or you merge it with, two different features, and all of a sudden, one developer, or like I said, once you get to scale, it gets more and more complex. If you can't have that isolation, you can't have that automation of the environment.
Yeah.
So,
and you say, oh, well, my engineers are smart. Maybe they can avoid that. But yeah, but if they do, that's still imposing a mental load on them. That means they've got to work slower. That means they've got to check more carefully. This is just all about making it as easy as possible, as low friction as possible for engineers, so they can devote 98% of their brain cycles on actually fixing these business problems or solving these business needs, not thinking about which lines do I did and is this a change from yesterday and all that sort of rubbish. We just want to make that a non-issue for them.
Yeah. And that,
Yeah, I
that
don't
reminds
care
me about
how
the typical
smart.
thing where an engineer just has to do production fix because that always happens, right? CEO calls, we need that in production now, right? And of course, we always forget that this change was made only in production. How many times has that happened? But, the beauty of DataOps for me is we can always follow the cycle I just talked about, right? This emergency fix will follow exactly the same principle. It will start at the feature branch, it's a hot fix, it goes all the way through the review and approval process, and we can still do it in a day, right? Because everything is self-contained, everything is in isolation, and everything actually can get tested all the way up. And that is also those things that excite me because nothing gets lost. Also, just remember, a lot of our customers are actually also regulated companies where there's a lot of effort on change management, on auditability, traceability, where that is equally important, right? So it's a matter of scale. And the topic of today really leads itself to that one. It's about employing it consistently every single time, no matter if it's an emergency or if it's at scale development, scaled out to tens of teams.
Yeah, and I think that's really one of the main benefits of not just environment management, but having that full cycle that you have in a procedural way with a tool set. That's where, and again, when I ran the consulting company, we built content management systems before WordPress was around. Sure, we built a lot of these things and you can build it, do it yourself, but at the end of the day, that's just not going to have the same consistency as a data product, a data framework, a process that's always repeatable, already using best practices. And, my switches, I built a lot of custom code over the years, but at this point, as the complexity has grown, right? Am I going to build another WordPress? It just doesn't make sense anymore. And that's why, I really truly believe in this platform and just the automation and the efficiency, being able to develop any data related application or product faster. And like you said, the governance, we've had it, but it really wasn't taken seriously till last 5-10 years. And, there's laws now associated with that. So you have to have this accountability, see where all these changes were made. And, without a tool set like DataOps.live, it gets more and more challenging to do that.
And I really like the WordPress example there, because that's very much kind of how I see what we do. Back in the early days of doing content management, people built their own content management systems. And in the very early days of DevOps and DataOps, people had to build their own. And then a platform came along and it didn't stop people being able to do what they needed to do. It simply said, look, there's a standard generic set of plumbing and infrastructure and things that you're going to need, the way you do users and roles and A/B testing and a million and one other things, extensibility. Let's solve that once. Let's have everybody build their website. It doesn't mean your website's any less valuable. You get exactly the same out of it. It just meant that you could build it in a week rather than building it in a year. So everybody builds their own website in the same way that ultimately everybody builds their own DataOps pipelines. The question is, are you starting from ones and zeros and trying to build up from nothing? Or are you starting with on a platform where 95% of the problems are solved and you're addressing the 5% that are specific to you? And so I like that analogy against WordPress. I think is really, really valuable.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's almost like with a lot of the Snowflake, listen, I love the platform. I've been advocating it for like 6 years. But it is a very big paradigm shift. And it's also from a world where we're just talking about it. Like Snowflake was one of the first ones who really changed the game and made things like automated and easier versus we want to improve the queries. Let's look at the statistics. Let's use that. So I think it's just challenging, just like WordPress, it takes people a while to kind of realize it's such a game changer. You got to move over to this. Do you guys want to cover too more about like the scale. I think Thomas covered it a little bit, but I think the other big point that I'm trying to make to the audience is, like, yeah, I mean, when we did one of the earliest Snowflake migrations to, I remember with Petco in like 2018, and like I think Terraform, like we built a lot of this stuff, or what we could at that time, with custom code. A lot of them, there was none of these migration tools back then either. So, but to me, it's just like when you want to get to scale, you could maybe get by as a really small data team and data warehouse, even though you're not going to be as efficient, by writing some custom database change management, where you're doing cloning or using some of the older tools like SnowChange. But if you want to scale, that just is not going to work across a Roche, across a massive organization with, you know, hundreds of data projects, thousands of data engineers, or even anybody that's got 10 at 20. That just doesn't scale anymore. You guys want to talk a little bit more about
Well, I think,
how the test environments scale? How does it help a company grow?
well, I think one of the things that's worth touching on, because I mean, we talk about this concept of an environment, but it's worth kind of thinking, well, what do we actually mean by that? Because I will bet a lot of people, listening to this, and I bet a lot of people, we talk to day to day, think, for example, that, well, hey, Snowflake made this problem go away. An environment is a zero copy clone. Brilliant. Well, and don't get me wrong, without zero copy clone, the world is a much more difficult place. But zero copy clone is one piece of a pretty big puzzle. So even when I think about an environment overall, I think about it as having four things. First of all, there's the infrastructure itself, and that's the move from on-prem to cloud. That's the move for compute on demand. I mean, I remember I came from a world of servers, and we had an office with a data room and racks and things like that. And when we wanted to bring up a new data warehouse to do some testing, first thing you wrote the PO for your servers, and then you had a new rack, and probably need to upgrade to UPS. I mean, this was a 1-year project. And I remember when I first started playing with Redshift, and I said to a project manager friend of mine, I said, like, can you believe this? How long would it take you to migrate to a new version of a data warehouse? Oh, probably a year. I said, hey, I just did it in Redshift in 2 weeks. And that seemed incredible at the time. Now I look at 2 weeks and think, this is happening in real time today, and we're not, not even thinking about it. But the infrastructure, I think, is a very well solved piece. Everybody's moving to the cloud, and that elasticity of infrastructure is well solved. The second piece the environment needs, and it's very specific to us, is the data itself. And yeah, absolutely, zero copy clone allows me to take some production data, a set of production data, whether it be some schemas or a database, and create copy on write versions of that very quickly and very cheaply and operate on them. So yeah, that's absolutely a solution for many people. But don't think that on its own maybe isn't enough. If that production data is sensitive, you may not want the sensitive data in the hands of every engineer in the company. So maybe you need to start either using, you need to start building role-based dynamic masking policies or row access policies, so that outside of production, people see obfuscated data. Or maybe you need to have special sets of data that are loaded into certain development environments. Maybe certain environments don't need the 10 petabytes of production data. Maybe for doing simple work, zero copy clone is very, very efficient, but it's not zero overhead, and lots of copies of 10 petabytes is still quite a lot if all I'm doing is doing a change to a customer table, for example. So, managing subsets of data. And there are actually some great tools out there now that will do synthetic data. They'll actually look at your real data and say, hey, this is a zip code, or this is a Norwegian telephone number in this column, and it will create you a whole bunch of synthetic data that looks and feels and smells like your production data, but is completely sanitized. So the data itself, yes, zero copy clone is a powerful tool, and many of our customers use it, but it's only one piece of the puzzle. The third piece is the functionality. And I think this is really where, a lot of people start kind of coming unstuck, is my data is not the only piece of my data platform. My data platform has got data, but it's also got users and roles and warehouses and resource monitors and all of these other objects that go around it. And a lot of people focus on just, hey, how am I creating environments about the data? And I would argue that things like roles, as in particular, are actually in many ways more important than the data. If I'm making a change to the role, I'm making a change to a role, the blast radius of that is dramatically bigger than probably making a change to a table. I might be giving access to a whole bunch of my customers to see other people's data. So absolutely, do I want to be able to test that in a feature branch environment? Do I want to be able to get my colleagues to peer review it? Do I want to test it in an integration environment and get it QA'd and so on? Absolutely. So, zero copy clone has nothing to do with copying across all my roles and creating my virtual warehouses and things like that. So don't kid yourself that environment management is just zero copy clone. Zero copy clone is one little piece of it, but to do true environments, you've got to have all of the other pieces that go with it. And finally, what that brings together, the fourth element, is isolation. The only way that a data engineer can move quickly and be efficient is by being confident that I can't break anyone else's stuff. Most importantly, I can't break production, and also that no one else can break my stuff. If I see a problem, I need to know that no one else caused it. So an environment is only really worth much if it's truly isolated. I can't break anybody else's stuff. No one else can break my stuff. So if you take those four things together, the infrastructure, which cloud typically brings, the data, the functionality parity between the different environments, and then the isolation between environments, you put all those things together, and now you've got something truly powerful. But it is dramatically more than where everyone starts, which is, well, I just put I put a quick zero copy clone in a script and I'm off to the races. Yeah, congratulations, you're on step one. You've got another 399 to go to get to a fully effective, efficient environment management system.
And the one thing I would add, what Guy just described, kid you not, is actually just foundation, because it actually just describes your data platform, everything you need to do in your data platform. We have not talked about your business logic on top of it that makes use of the data, right? What are the data applications that you have on top of it? Snowflake itself now has Streamlit, but typically in a data platform that you go and build out, you want to bring the data back to, at a minimum, a decision system, Tableau, data visualization system. You want to bring it back to your operational system, let's say your CRM, your Salesforce, the SAP, and so on and so forth. And that exactly falls into very same discussion. How, as a data engineer or as a group of data teams, do I make sure I make my changes across each of these planes that I have and I'm responsible for and make these changes? So with DataOps, you actually can, and we can help you go and do that at each of the layers, right? At the infrastructure, at the next layer up, where we go change the data all the way up to where you actually want to change the business logic as well and make the changes there. Because at the end of the day, it's an end-to-end pipeline that covers each of these aspects.
Yeah, that's great emphasis on that. Do you guys, we're about at the time here. Do you have any other kind of final thoughts? I think what you just said, Guy, was really, and Thomas, really useful. Like how we use scale, how we use DataOps for scale, how do we get these four different areas, and the isolation is very key. So as we sign off on this, any final thoughts?
I think all I would do is echo what you said at the beginning is, the pace of change and innovation is so high. This challenge, I would say, is getting twice as hard every year. Probably, twice as hard every 9 months. There's so many new things coming. Every one of them has an implication on the way I'm doing environments and things like that. So yeah, it's a big problem today, but don't think about this challenge of environment management as a static target. If I do enough work, I can hit it. By the time you've hit it, it's got 8 times more difficult in the time that it took you to get there. Chasing it is an absolutely full-time job, and it's what Thomas and I spend most of our lives doing in many ways.
Yeah. So with that, I guess we'll wrap up. I do want to make sure that the audience knows, while this is unfiltered, we still want to be able to educate you. So we'll send out an email with the recording of this. And I'll also go into like the 4 points that Guy just made and the additional scaling points that Thomas just made. And we want to help educate you on why we feel this is such a game changer. And there'll also be a form if you're interested in DataOps.live services. You can sign up. We can get you training of how to get started, and you can understand more about why it's such a differentiator and can help your teams. If you want to build, especially native apps, faster, higher quality, more governed, less risk, that's what we're all about. And so let us know and we can help you do it. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Thanks Thomas and Guy for joining me, and we'll see you next time.
Cheers, everyone.